Hello, hello. We are starting. You ready?
Yeah, I think so.
Welcome to the first panel of today, which is all about oceans. I'm Rebecca Daniel. I'm the director of the Marine Diaries, which is an organisation dedicated to kind of communicating ocean science through storytelling and digital media. And something that I've been thinking a lot about recently is our kind of disconnection to nature. In our kind of Western society, we see ourselves as separate from nature, but really, we're so interconnected. And this lack of connection, this lack of understanding and appreciation has kind of led us down this slightly dark path of extraction and over-exploitation. So we really need to kind of rethink our relationship with the Earth and with the planet and with our ocean. And obviously there's lots of issues affecting the planet. There's so many, sometimes it's quite overwhelming. And there's no real single solution to any of them either. So we all really need to, work together. And it's really important to have top-down action from governments and businesses. But I think it's important to recognise that we all also have power ourselves to make a difference, whether that's through being a consumer, an employee, a voter. We can really do something. So I'm really excited to bring together this amazing panel of speakers working across plastic, fisheries, and ocean biodiversity conservation. So we're going to be spotlighting positive solutions that you guys can take and also progress on these different issues to hopefully inspire you that people are working on these things around the world. So we have Chris from UOcean, Tom from Blue Ventures, and Ed from Whale and Dolphin Conservation. So sadly, Avril couldn't make it today, but I am going to be speaking a little bit about her work, so you can learn about that as well. And we'll hopefully have some time at the end for questions, but if not, please do feel free to come up and speak to us. We'll be around after the talk. So living in London, there's plastic everywhere. It's products in our shops, litter on our streets, it's in the parks. I've seen plastic pollution along our coastlines and in the ocean all around the world. It's not only a problem for wildlife, but we're now beginning to realise that this is a problem for human health as well. And Earth Day on Monday is actually highlighting that issue. So, Chris, your organisation, UOcean, is really tackling this issue at the source. Can you tell us just a bit more about what you do?
Yeah, sure. Good morning. How's everyone? Come on. Are we okay? Thank you. We've woken up. Sure. Thank you. So UOcean was set up basically in the United Kingdom to tackle the problem of river plastics, canal plastics, ocean plastics. We're seeing it all over the country. And one of the main things I think around plastics is that it's coming from us. A lot of times, we can look to governments, we look to organizations to say, what are we doing about this? But ultimately, the plastic didn't get in our canals, rivers, or beaches ourselves. So it's one of these things that we're a grassroots organization. Currently, we've scaled to 18 sites in the UK. So UOcean London, UOcean Leicester, etc. Search us on Instagram. Shameless plug. But yeah, the idea was that actually we need community-based action. We can change government policy levels and things like that, but if we don't change within ourselves, then how are we going to solve this? And one of the issues was about diversity within conservation. Communities in the city are rarely recognized that actually if plastics are coming out of the cities, why are we not dealing with it at home, in the cities, at the first point of call? By the time it's out in the ocean, it's pretty much a lost cause, right? My analogy is always that if there is a doctor's operating on someone, would he stem the wound or would he mop the blood up off the floor? You'd stem the wound, right? So we can stop it in our homes, in our businesses, in our cities, in our rivers, canals, before it reaches there. So that's what UOcean does. And we're a nomination for the Earthshot Prize 2024 this year. So, hey.
Well, we'll have our fingers and toes crossed for you, Chris. And what I love about what you do is you make cleaning up plastic through your community fun and accessible. So could you, talk a bit about the actual ways that you get people to go out? And I know you've got also something happening tomorrow, which is quite exciting. And is that something that you found works well, or what was it that made you want to make it kind of more fun?
Yeah, 100%. I think when you think of conservation, you think of like someone in Costa Rica counting turtles. You don't see someone in Paddington on a go boat with some music on, cheese board and a bottle of wine, right, with a litter picker. So what we wanted to do is make conservation glossy, right? If you want the young generations to get involved, you want to excite people for the planet, then you need to make it look cool. You need to make it impactful, and you need to make them feel valued. A lot of the times when I wanted to first go into conservation, I went to these organizations around the coastlines, and one, I didn't feel welcome. Two, none of them looked like me. And three, it was literally, there was just research. And as much as we need research, the house is on fire. So why don't we throw some water on it instead of, it looks like it's 400 degrees today. Maybe it'll collapse when it's at 450. And I thought, let's engage. Let's go in the cities. Let's make conservation glossy, look good, fun. We do it through paddleboarding. We do it through kayaks, through boats. We've just started this year to put river barriers across the UK. So actually we can stop the plastic from going out to the oceans before it even gets there. So that's the whole idea, that we take a lot of photographs, video, put music on, food, community, and plus wherever you're from, we like to include you in the conversation. So, if there's a chapter in Paddington, that might be very different from a chapter in Manchester, or Manchester will be different to Leicester. So it's about actually making it accessible for people and also making it familiar. It's like, oh, people like me are doing this, so therefore I can do it as well. And that's what I wanted to create with UOcean, because I didn't find that in the UK.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that we need to include everyone in environmental stewardship and caring about our planet, because these issues are so complex. We need lots of different people to be engaged, and also this planet belongs to everyone, and it should be for them to enjoy and conserve as well. I'd love to hear a bit more about the plastic barriers that you're using. I know there's one in Paddington, the bubble net. Is that what you're using, or are you using something else?
No. So what we're using is like low cost, low technology, and locally made. The things like, you've got great inventions like the bubble barriers, but the issue is that it needs constant supplies of energy. So as much as you may be able to stop, floating plastics, that has to be on very still water. And we're talking big rivers, we're talking estuaries. So what our barriers are literally just aluminium frames with some tubing on top, held in by a steel cable. And then it uses the natural flow of the water just to go through, lets the plankton and fish life and all the different things go through as well, but stops the floating plastics. So it's just an efficient way to stop it. But we're finding that we're doing our first one, literally, it's been installed in 2 months in Leicester. And we've gone up against the councils for about 2.5 years just to get permission for the first one. And you see these issues where they're saying, it's bad for optics. It's going to really highlight the problem. Is that not exactly what we need to do, right? Thank God I'm not a politician. But yeah, the idea is that we're coming up against these barriers to put a barrier in. But 2.5 years, we've finally got permission. So we're actually installing the first one in the UK, which will be a line in the sand. And since we've got the permission, we've had other cities from Scotland all the way down to Weymouth say, can you come and do one here? Can you put one here? So it's like, just like UOcean is, once one person steps over the line, everyone else goes, oh yeah, it's okay, I can come as well. And that's what it is. It's about inspiring, being brave, being, inspirational to take those steps that no one else is doing. And I think the funny thing is as well, the first time you go and actually pick some plastic up off the floor, it's an experience in itself. Because as much as we say we love the planet, we want to protect it, are we willing to do it ourselves? I think, are we willing to take the ownership on ourselves? It's not about being perfect, because true sustainability I don't think exists. But actually, these small actions that you take in your homes, small actions that we take today, reusable water bottles, just whatever it may be, something so small. If 7 billion people in the planet did something so small, problem solved, and I can retire and actually do what I want to do. Thank you.
So what would you recommend for the people in the audience? Maybe just a few things that they could take away and go and do today. Just what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think honestly, start really simply. Start simple. If you want to become an eco-warrior, then go for it. I'll join you. But you know what? It's just like, if you walk by a bit of plastic, pick it up. If you're recycling at home, write to your councils, write to your MPs, ask, where is that plastic being recycled, right? So in the UK, we know that the plastic recycling system is completely broken, yeah? So a lot of our plastics get exported to Asia because then it's their problem. That's not recycling. It gets recycled by being burnt in the UK. The bags that you put it in, right, they actually go and burn a lot of them because that's called thermal recycling. They capture the energy in the power stations, which then literally makes loads more toxic chemicals. So start asking those questions, and be brave about it. Did you give permission to anyone to breathe in plastics, to have polluted waters, polluted beaches? This is your planet and your home. And I think a lot of the time, the language that's used around this, we get scared into doing nothing. I've got a friend recently who just booked a round-the-world trip, and this guy's like, for the planet, it's like 30 flights. And I was like, why have you done that? And he was like, well, it's all going, right? So I want to see it before it goes. It scares people into inaction or to do things like that. I'm not saying don't fly. I'm not saying don't go on a holiday. I'm just saying take those small steps to be more sustainable. And as you do that, as your communities do that, your homes, your children, your schools, your universities, your workplaces, it starts this wave. And from that wave, I honestly believe that we're going into a beautiful future, but we just have to believe in it.
Thank you. That was, really inspiring. And please don't forget to volunteer with UOcean and join a cleanup as well. So obviously a big part of your work is tackling these larger scale, larger plastics, stopping them at the source. And Avril, who sadly couldn't be with us today, she's also working on stopping plastics at the source, but working on much, much smaller scales. So her work at Cleaner Seas is all about stopping microfibers from your washing. So you may or may not know, but every time you wash your clothes, which are mostly made of plastic, unless you're buying 100% cotton, they release around 20 million microfibers in each wash. So that's a lot. And in terms of the ocean, that wastewater from our clothes goes through wastewater treatment plants, which generally can't trap those microplastics. And then they make their way through rivers into the ocean. And around 30% of the microfibers found in the ocean are literally from our washing. So what Avril and her team have done is create this amazing solution, which is called Indy. It's a simple kind of filter machine. It can be fitted to any washing machine. And it captures all microfibers that come out of the wastewater. And that's whether they're plastic, cotton, or any other material as well. You should definitely check it out. It's really, really cool. And that will help prevent, if everyone in the UK got one of those, around 1,500 double-decker buses per weight of microplastics entering the ocean. So check it out, maybe buy one. Just wanted to kind of spotlight her a little bit, seeing as she couldn't be here with us. So another big contributor to plastic in the ocean, which I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize, is fisheries. So discarded or lost fishing gear, which is known as ghost gear, makes up around 10% of all the rubbish in the ocean. These nets kind of float around, they trap marine life, and they're also breaking up. They're not breaking down like normal organic material, but they're breaking up into smaller and smaller pieces, releasing those microfibers as well. And some people here might have seen Seaspiracy and be wondering if sustainable fisheries actually exist. But there's a really important distinction here to be made between small-scale fisheries and industrial fisheries. So, Tom, you're the expert on this. Can you tell us a bit about the work that Blue Ventures is doing and also the difference between small-scale and industrial fisheries?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks so much, Rebecca. So hi, everyone. Really good to see you all. I work with Blue Ventures in the advocacy team, and Blue Ventures' mission is to rebuild small-scale fisheries with coastal communities around the world. But within that mission statement, there's a bit of a secret message, because small-scale fisheries are actually not small at all. They're enormous. And small-scale fishers actually represent the biggest group of ocean users on the planet. And now I'm going to kind of assault you with statistics just to really hammer that point home, because it is so important to recognize that small-scale fisheries for Blue Ventures and for marine conservation efforts around the world are so central. So, over 500 million people depend, at least partially, on small-scale fisheries. There are 110 million people directly employed as small-scale fishers, which represents 90% of the global fisheries workforce. Almost half of those workers are women, so the fisherman label is not accurate in the context of small-scale fisheries. They produce 40% of all of the seafood caught in capture fisheries. And in some regions, so in Africa, they produce 75% of the seafood, and in Asia, it's 50%. So they're super, super important for labor provision, food provision, and also in particularly more food insecure contexts, so important for nutrition. So high nutrition micronutrients and omega-3 fatty acids come from small-scale fisheries, and they really provide a foundation of food security for early childhood development and for pregnant women and for other phases of life where you need a lot of these nutrients. So small-scale fisheries are super, super important. At Blue Ventures, we recognize the central role that small-scale fishers play and actually realize that these coastal communities stand to gain the most from marine conservation. They stand to gain the most if we do it well. They stand to lose the most if we do it badly. So we need to involve these people. They need to be at the center of what we do, and they need to be leading the charge when we're talking about marine protected areas, fisheries management, coastal development. This all affects small-scale fishing communities. Okay, so I hope that has hammered the point home. Small-scale fisheries, super important. Blue Ventures has been working with small-scale fishing communities around the world for about 20 years now, supporting them with management efforts so that their local fisheries can be sustainable. So, for example, in Madagascar, that looks like supporting a community that catches octopus to close that fishery temporarily so that those octopus can grow, and then ultimately they can harvest a lot more octopus, charge a lot more for their product, and the investment they make in closing the fishery is outweighed by the benefits they get when those octopus grow exponentially within the closure period. So that's Blue Ventures and small-scale fisheries. You asked about industrial fisheries as well. There's a big distinction between small-scale fisheries and industrial-scale fisheries. All fisheries management is about weighing up the costs and benefits of this extractive practice. So all fishing involves removing marine life from the ocean. And what we've got to do is balance the social good of food provision, livelihood provision, and also the cultural identity that fisheries provide coastal communities around the world with the impact on marine life. And as I've said, small-scale fisheries, they provide loads of jobs, they provide loads of food, they're really culturally important in different parts of the world. And their environmental impact is significant, but they're much more selective and targeted and low impact compared to these industrial fisheries. Industrial fisheries are much more mechanized, there's less direct labor involved. Often the companies involved in industrial fishing are vertically integrated, so they do the catching, the processing, and the retail. So the social benefits they provide are fewer. They're providing food, but typically it's to wealthier countries, so the food security component is less significant, but they're much, much more environmentally impactful. It's fishing methods like bottom trawling, industrial tuna purse seining, it's long lining. It's these methods that catch vast quantities of seafood, often with really egregious environmental harm, but then they don't have the maximum social benefit that small-scale fisheries provide. So when we think about fisheries, it's quite helpful to think about this dichotomy between low impact, sustainable, and that's like socially, environmentally, and economically sustainable small-scale fisheries, and then more harmful industrial-scale fisheries. So that's kind of how we think about the work with Blue Ventures, really amplifying, celebrating, supporting these small-scale actors that are central to marine conservation, central to the sustainability of our ocean, and then also trying to transform and transition these industrial fisheries that are actually doing quite a lot of harm.
So yeah, you mentioned there bottom trawling. And for anyone that doesn't know, that is basically this really destructive practice of dragging huge nets along the seafloor. It's very unselective. It can damage really sensitive habitats like corals, anything that's kind of living in the seabed. So Tom, a lot of your work at Blue Ventures is particularly around really transforming, not necessarily completely banishing that practice, but transforming it into, a more sustainable kind of method and working with people to change that. Could you tell us a little bit about the coalition and what you're doing there?
Yeah, sure. So happy to. So, bottom trawling is one of these industrial scale fishing methods. It's an kind of incredible way to catch fish because it's so efficient. Bottom trawlers will scoop up everything on the seabed, all of the target species, the non-target species, like even inorganic matter is all scooped up by these bottom trawlers. So its impact on the seabed is really intense, but it catches a vast quantity of fish. So about a quarter of all of the seafood produced globally comes from bottom trawlers, and they employ like tens of thousands of people in the catching sector and in processing and everything else. When you go to the fish and chip shop and you get your cod and your haddock and your plaice, that's typically coming from bottom trawlers. So it's an important component of global fisheries. But if you think about that balance between the social good, livelihood provision, food provision versus the environmental harm, it's definitely falling into this category of unacceptable levels of environmental harm. And you can think about the environmental harm in a few ways. So its impact on the seabed, there is no other human activity that impacts such a vast area of our ocean seabed. So it's the biggest human-driven disturbance to the world's seabed habitats compared to anything else we do in the oceans. It's also very unselective. So the vast majority of the unintended marine life that's thrown back into the oceans, dead or dying from fishing, comes from bottom trawling. About 50% of all discards is from bottom trawling, but in Europe, that goes up to 90%. So 90% of all of the discards in Europe is coming from this particular sector. And I read a statistic recently that was kind of crazy. Does anyone know what a sole is? A kind of fish called a sole? I see some nods. A kind of flat fish lives on the seabed. Yeah, a flat one lives on the seabed. For every kilogram of sole caught in the North Sea, 16 kilograms of marine life is thrown back into the ocean. That's about the same weight as a suitcase you would check in when you're traveling on a flight. So it's a significant amount of marine life that's wasted. There's also the carbon component. Dragging a net along the seabed is super carbon intensive. It requires a lot of diesel, and also that process of dragging it along the seabed resuspends the carbon that's locked into those sediments. So the oceans lock up about 25% of all of the carbon that we produce, and when trawlers drag the seabed, it resuspends this organic matter in the seabed. And just through the resuspension of this organic matter alone, that's about twice the amount of emissions for the entire global fishing sector combined. Okay, so bottom trawling, as I hope you can appreciate now, is super high impact. It's a bit of a nightmare, but we can fix it. We know how to fix it. We know how to transition to more sustainable practices, and we know that fishing can be done well. It's a super daunting thing to try and transform because it's such a big component of our fisheries, but there are hundreds of organizations around the world trying to do something about this in a way that's equitable and sustainable. So we launched this coalition back in 2021 to connect and identify and connect all of these different groups and then give them the resources that they need to develop and launch effective campaigns to tackle bottom trawling and transition it to more sustainable activities. So it's the Transform Bottom Trawling Coalition. Check it out if you're online. We've got a bunch of members, and a lot of those members are in the UK, and you can engage with those members. They've got campaigns, they've got petitions, and I think we'll maybe come on to solutions a bit later. But it's a really scary topic to be addressing. Loads of the impact of bottom trawling is out of sight and out of mind because it's on the seabed, but there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of momentum around trying to transform this practice.
And just very briefly, could you give us some pointers to people in the audience of how, if they're in the supermarket, what they should maybe look for, or how they can support some of these campaigns that you've mentioned?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. a helpful thing to think about when you're consuming seafood is what fish is on your dish and where did it come from. It's super, super hard to work out what's sustainable in the context of fisheries because they're quite complex, but there's some helpful tools. So the Marine Conservation Society has this good fish guide, and it's a really helpful, simple printout, and it just gives a sustainability rating for the common seafood that you'll encounter in the supermarkets. So check out the Good Seafood Guide from the Marine Conservation Society. But it's also important to know that individual consumer actions are important, and they can drive some degree of change, but we've really got to come together as collectives and as movements and drive kind of collective change together. And if you're in Scotland, there's a movement called the Our Seas Coalition, and they've got a movement to try and get bottom trawling out of the coastal zone, push it offshore to allow seabeds to recover, and the public can engage with that campaign. And then if you're in England, there's a group called Oceana, and they've just launched a campaign trying to get bottom trawling out of marine protected areas. So it seems insane, but we have these big protected areas that are trying to recover marine life, but in many of these protected areas, bottom trawling is allowed to continue, which is completely nuts. And they've launched a campaign where you can easily email your local MP, you can sign a petition, get them to do something about this environmental harm. So I'd say those are the good ways to get involved.
Great, thank you so much. And I think something to also note is with fisheries, if you actually give them a chance to recover, they can, some of them. And, in general, the ocean is quite resilient. If we give it a chance, it can bounce back, but we need to kind of give it that chance. It's just really important to actually protect the life in the ocean, because that whole, the ocean as a whole is what supports us and all of life on this planet in terms of mitigating climate change, oxygen production, and loads of other ecosystem services as well. So Ed, Whale and Dolphin Conservation are working really hard to safeguard some of the biggest animals on the planet. Could you tell us a bit more about the approach that you guys take to wildlife conservation?
Sure, thanks Rebecca. So thanks everyone for coming down today. My name's Ed from Whale and Dolphin Conservation. I'm our Head of Intergovernmental Engagement, which is a horrible job title. But basically it means I lead all of our international policy work across various different international agreements and conventions to protect whales and dolphins and restore their populations. So when I speak in London, I think it's always good to do a little bit of education about Wales and London. So I think a lot of people don't know how important Wales actually were to the Industrial Revolution, and London was really a hub for that. And the UK had a booming whaling industry, which was led out of various ports around the country, but a lot of that always came back to London because our street lights in London before electricity were powered by whale oil. Which is absolutely bananas. We were going out and killing these majestic, incredible animals so that we could light our street lights and have lights in our homes. So that's unfortunately still going on. We're not a whaling nation anymore, but there are still intentional harms that are carried out to both whales and dolphins all around the world. There is still, despite the International Whaling Commission's moratorium on whaling in 1986, still commercial whaling businesses operating around the world in Iceland, Norway, and Japan. And so we're constantly fighting against these people who are flagrantly still going out and killing whales. We're fighting against this in Iceland at the moment. There's one final whaler that's still going out and killing whales, fin whales, which are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN's red list. It's just crazy that we're still doing this and killing these creatures. So that's really kind of one of our first and foremost things, is tackling these intentional harms, that intentional killing, but then also the persecution of things like dolphins and orca in captivity, because there's no way that we can reasonably provide for these animals in a captive setting. They in the wild, they can go wherever they like and engage in all their natural behaviors. And in a tank, that's just impossible. And many of you have probably seen Blackfish. This year is the 10-year anniversary of that film, and it's in the top parts of Netflix at the moment. So I really encourage you to watch that if you haven't done already, or just watch it again for a reminder. and absolutely never buy a ticket to those kind of institutions. But then there's all the incidental harms that go along with that as well. You know, we've largely stopped commercial whaling. There are still those businesses still doing that. But at the same time, we've increased human pressure on the oceans by an absolutely ridiculous amount. So although some populations are recovering from whaling, they're really suffering from ocean noise, ocean pollution, climate change, people exploiting their food sources. And so we really need to tackle all of those things, and that we have our Safe Seas program of work, which is really looking to tackle all of those. And we've got incredible, amazing people all around the world working on marine protected areas, bycatch. As Tom was saying, fisheries are a huge pressure on the ocean, and those huge industrial trawlers, they have these enormous nets, and they can actually just catch entire whales, the biggest creatures that have ever lived in those nets. So we really have to reduce that pressure and think about stopping that from happening so that they can come back and engage in their role in the ecosystem. And that's a huge thing that we push as well in dolphin conservation, is the actual roles that these animals are performing in the ocean. They're not just existing, they're providing vital ecosystem services by just going about their natural lives. So that's something that we're really bringing into our work a lot more. We're working more in the climate space because whales and dolphins and all other marine life, and actually all animals, are providing these essential services which will help us tackle climate change and biodiversity loss. And when we're working to tackle all of these things, we've got a really integrated approach to how we do this. And we have a really strong ethos of working with people in country. So there's a lot of organizations that go around, you know, they can be quite angry about it. And there's been organizations going to places like Iceland and Norway and really having a go at them. But we know in places like Iceland now, the local communities there have flipped, and there's a majority of people who don't want these things to go ahead. So it's about platforming those local voices, the youth that are working there, to really get that change going, rather than us coming in as an organization from outside. So yeah, that's what we do.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important that we take this kind of integrated approach that you're talking about of, you know, looking from different angles, working with different groups, partnerships, collaboration, and also, you know, working through different kind of work streams, whether that's education, campaigns, policy. All of these things kind of need to happen at once to make an issue, you know, really be tackled. So in terms of, I guess, your vision for the future of whales and dolphins, what do you hope that will happen, or, you know, they'll be recognised in the future?
So all of those things that I mentioned, I really hope that they will decrease and eventually stop those intentional harms. You know, the plan was to stop that in the 1980s when we decided to have a worldwide moratorium on the practice of commercial whaling, but there are still these people flagrantly doing that, and we're working really hard to stop that from happening. And I really hope that within the next 5 or 10 years we can really do that, and that's being driven by the youth and people realizing that we shouldn't be doing this. And that's really changing the perspective. So that really gives me hope that we'll get there. The longer term change with things like incidental bycatch is really a lot more challenging, and it needs a lot more deeper work. And the kind of stuff that Tom's doing is absolutely fantastic in kind of getting this transition going and showing really good examples of how we can still use the ocean. It's like the world's foremost source of protein for 3 billion people, and so we have to carry on fishing, but we have to find better ways of doing that. But there's a brilliant project that's going on in Dominica at the moment, which is called Project SETI, which is, I mean, the stuff that is happening in the world with artificial intelligence is absolutely ridiculous. Like, it's going crazy. But in conservation, there's some really exciting things happening. And we're using it to decode how whales communicate with each other. And we knew that whales started singing in the 90s. Well, they didn't start. They've been singing for millions of years. But we realized and put it on records, and it changed the whole way that people viewed whales in the 1970s, because we realized they were singing. But now with artificial intelligence, we're able to really drill down with like deep learning and language tools to actually start understanding how they're piecing together their calls to each other. We know that they have individual names for each other. So I really hope that with this technology, as it's rapidly expanding in a sort of frighteningly way, but it's also incredible that in my lifetime, the whales will be able to commune with us, and they will say thank you, because bowhead whales, they live in the Arctic. They can live for 200 years, which is insane. But those animals have seen what we've done. Some of those older animals have seen an almost pristine ocean, but now they've experienced whaling. They've seen their families killed. They've seen oil and gas industries taking over the ocean. But some of those individuals will be able to see that actually we've changed course. So I hope that through that project, we might get to a point where the whales will say, thank you, humans, rather than please leave us alone. Thank you.
I really hope to have a conversation with a whale one day. Add that to the bucket list. And I think it's a really important point that you're kind of making about how we actually view wildlife and how we kind of connect to wildlife. And I know that's quite a big part of what you guys are trying to do at Whale and Dolphin Conservation. So what do you see as like the benefit of communicating about this culture and these ways of life that they have?
Yeah, I think tackling things like the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis can seem quite abstract to a lot of people. You know, it's a global thing, and we're just kind of clever monkeys wandering around thinking, what the hell's happened? But being able to actually connect to individual animals, and animals that are very similar to us. So whales and dolphins, they're mammals. They give birth to live young. They have names for each other. We're learning so much more about their cultures and how they build societies. And it's absolutely incredible how similar they are to us. And when we can see the impacts that we're having on things that we can really relate to, I think that's where we can bring it back to making changes. So I think learning more about them and having that emotional tie. There's an incredible book that I would encourage people to have a read of called We Are All Whalers by an incredible scientist called Michael Moore. And it connects almost everything that we do or touch or see in our lives to whales. And it's incredible to see all those links. And when you think about buying a cup of coffee or filling up your tank, and you can connect that to how that will impact an individual whale in the wild, it kind of makes you think in a different way, which I think is an important thing for us to start doing.
Yes, definitely. Hopefully you'll all be going to buy that book after this talk. So something that I think is really cool that Whale and Dolphin Conservation does is games for waves. And this basically taps into a huge community of kind of gamers, content creators and studios, and raises funds for marine conservation, for WDC. And over the last 10 years has actually raised £4.2 million. And I think what's really interesting about this is often in conservation, we unfortunately speak to the bubble of other conservationists, and we're all kind of nodding and agreeing like, yes, we need to do something. Yeah, I agree. Cool, yeah. But actually, we need to reach the people who don't know anything about this, who, aren't even aware of these issues or don't even have a connection with the ocean. And that is through tapping into different industries and making conservation fun and accessible and enjoyable. So as well as kind of that, if no one's a gamer here, what can people do to help protect whales and dolphins?
Yeah, shout out to all the gamers out there. I mean, it's absolutely crazy that we derive most of our money from the gaming industry. It's absolutely insane, and they're incredible people. I think people have a certain view of people that play games, but these people really care, and we found a way to tap into that and generate revenue for all of our conservation work that we do. But I think for the average person, supporting our work is really, really important. We've got offices around the world and we work with all sorts of different people, but that requires money and support. And we have various campaigns. We've got one that's launching next week for the Big Give. There's lots of amazing organizations that have got campaigns next week. But every donation that you give to us will be doubled, and all of that work will go to all of that funding will go to our work in Norway, where we're working with local communities to change hearts and minds in Norway, to change perspectives and flip that country, like we're seeing in Iceland, into a more positive, harmonious relationship with whales.
Perfect. Well, that brings us to the end of our panel. And I'm hoping that although there are lots of issues affecting the ocean, you're feeling kind of inspired and empowered to maybe take away just one of the suggestions that have been made today. And this is actually my first time moderating a panel, so I want to say a huge thank you to the speakers for making it such an incredible conversation. And please do make sure to follow each one of them and support their work. Thank you.